Today I'm going to introduce my personal vision of the problem of improvement in chess, and I'm going to show you one interesting game that was played between Vladimir Kramnik and Veselin Topalov 1 year ago. Besides being a modern masterpiece, a positional masterpiece, this game is also quite suitable in view of our goals. So to present the problem of improvement and to come up with some tips on this topic. So let's get to chess content. And let us start. So Kramnik started normally with the d4, his main opening choice. Knight f6, knight f3, and after e6, instead of playing something really ambitious, he played e3. A bit strange move for the player like Kramnik, probably, but only at first sight. So the question here is, what is the main reason for choosing such a non-ambitious opening line? So according to Kramnik, he played this opening line to that moment already in several blitz and rapid games, and had a good success, has had a great success in that. And actually Topalov didn't see those games, so this opening choice appeared as a surprise to him, so his opening preparation was completely destroyed. And usually when your opponent faces such a problem, he appears under serious psychological pressure, which means he starts being nervous a bit, he starts thinking a lot, so spending a lot of time, which may lead to a time trouble. So actually it is already some sort of advantage to surprise your opponent. Not a big surprise that Topalov eventually came up with the not very successful order of moves. So he played c5. After bishop d3, he answered with the b6. So as we can see, everything goes to some sort of a version of Queen's Indian defense. However, we should know that in Queen's Indian defense, Black usually doesn't hurry up with the c5 move. So Black usually wants to develop his pieces first, then probably to play d5 if possible, and only then when everything is prepared to play c5. So that makes a difference here. Castles, bishop goes to b7, and White naturally continues with the c4, preparing knight c3 with the occupation of the center. So already here Black has some problems, because White's plan is clear. He wants to play knight c3 and then probably even playing d5. So sometimes in such a pawn structure, this pawn sacrifice, if it is a sacrifice of course, makes sense, because it leads to a very promising pawn structure. So here Topalov took on d4 with the idea of undermining the center with the help of d5 next. So after e takes and bishop e7, knight c3, he played exactly d5. So here we can see that the main threat of d4, d5 is prevented, and inevitably we will achieve a position with the isolated queen's pawn on d4. Because it doesn't matter if White takes on d5 or Black takes on c4, so this pawn will arise. It is a vulnerable pawn, however, that is a typical position in which, if White manages to save as much resources as he can and come up with some sort of active play, he usually has a very nasty initiative. So let's see what happens if, for example, Black doesn't play d5 and continues with the natural castling. Also an interesting continuation, but here White exactly has a chance to play d5, grabbing the space, and the point here is that pawn on d5 is invulnerable. Let's see. If takes, then takes, for example, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and White immediately wins the pawn back after bishop h7. And let's see, king takes, queen takes on d5. White has a clear advantage here. Because of the pawn structure, first of all, we can see that Black now has an isolated pawn. Moreover, it is not on d5 but on d7. It is very hard to improve its position since white has great blockading resources. And pay attention to the king. So after h7 went away from the board, the king is kind of exposed. So in addition to play against this vulnerable pawn, white has interesting chances to come up with some sort of the attack on the king side. So here white is clearly better, which means that d5 here was more or less forced. Kramnik immediately clarifies the pawn structure, so he takes on d5, forcing knight takes d5. Since taking with the e6 pawn will be sort of mistake, because after that bishop b7 will be really passive. If bishop takes on d5, well, white can also think of just taking the bishop on d5 and achieving pair of bishops, so it might be dangerous for black. So knight d5 looks like the most natural continuation, and it was actually played. White also continued in a natural way, so knight goes to e5. That is a good outpost for the knight, since here the knight is centralized, it exerts direct pressure on black's most vulnerable points, such as f7, for example. It makes not so simple for black to continue development in many cases. And why this position is so great? Because actually black has no real chance to play f6, since f6 really weakens position. e6 becomes a dead weakness, and white has a chance to attack it, and so on. So f6 is very dubious decision here. So all this means knight on e5 is for a long time. After castling, queen also jumps to g4. So as I said before, white's main plan here is to come up with the attack on the king side, right? So this means white has to concentrate majority of his pieces on the king side, so getting closer to opponent's king. So after playing queen g4, Kramnik actually created some sort of nasty threat of bishop h6. That is the main threat at the moment. So the idea is very simple, to exert pressure on g7 and to force it moving, for example. So for instance, knight d7, a normal development move, will be a mistake in the view of bishop h6. Now g6 leads to bishop f8. So the only possibility to protect g7 and not to lose the material is bishop to f6. But as you can see, bishop occupies a position which is usually occupied by the knight, which means that there is no enough defense of the h7 square. So white can continue with the queen e4, creating a threat of queen h7 checkmate, which finally forces g6 move, and after bishop takes f8, white has a material advantage. So after queen g4, as you can see, position is already quite dangerous for black, not very pleasant to protect. So black has to be extremely careful, and the most natural idea here is to do something with the queen, right? Because queen is the most dangerous piece here. One of possible moves here is knight to f6. So after that, queen goes to h4, exerting pressure on h7, as you can see. And now white's plan is very simple. So white wants to continue development with probably aggressive move bishop to g5, creating a sort of taking on f6 and then getting to h7 with a checkmate, or at least a dangerous attack. If black makes a concession on the king side, playing something like h6, in many cases it will be possible for white just to sacrifice the bishop there on h6, a typical idea here, coming up with some sort of a attack with the help of the rook lift. So for example, rook through e1 goes to e3 and then gets to the open g file or something like that. So h6 will be really dangerous to play. But in this position, black has a choice which is quite tempting, but at the same time quite dangerous. It is knight to e4, attacking the queen. As you can see, knight on e4 is protected by the bishop, so queen can't take the knight. And at the same time, we can see that knight on e4 breaks the connection between the queen and the pawn on d4. So next move, after queen retreats, black can take on d4. So after natural queen h3, saving the queen on this dangerous file, h file, queen takes d4, attacking the knight, and at the same time supporting knight e4. White can continue with bishop to f4. And this position is rather unclear. So to that moment, it happened only in one game of Antonetta Stefanova, so there was a draw. However, during all the game, White had an unpleasant pressure on Black's position, having the initiative and great attacking prospects. So Kramnik definitely was prepared for this scenario and had something up his sleeve. So probably Topalov understood this possibility exists, but it was extremely dangerous to get to this position, since it was clear that Kramnik was better prepared to this game and definitely analyzed this position in depth. So just to show you possible variations here, after knight f6, going away and protecting h7 pawn, White continues with the knight e2, very concrete move, attacking the queen and preparing some improvement of that knight through f4. For example, queen goes away, bishop g5, again creating a concrete threat of taking on f6 and then taking on h7, which literally forces g6 move. White can continue with the bishop h6 here, and then, for example, after rook e1, knight f4, White has a lot of different threats. Despite being a pawn less, White definitely has an upper hand here. So knight f7 or knight e6 are in the air. So different combinations based on sacrificing minor pieces on the king side. So let's just count. So we have a queen, the knight, another knight, the bishop, and another bishop, and the rook actually just attacking on the king side. So it is a great advantage in the quantity of resources there. So that is rather dangerous. However, probably this was Black's best option. And definitely this position deserves further analysis and practice to understand the real evaluation. So in the game, after queen g4, Topalov decided to solve the problem of this active queen and great threats to h7, g7 with the help of very active but at the same time quite dubious move. So he played f5, completely closing diagonal b1, h7. So we can see there is nothing to do with the queen on the king side anymore. However, this move has a serious drawback. As you can see, pawn e6 can't be protected with pawns from adjacent files, so it became a weakness. And after queen e2 and bishop to f6, it's very useful to follow Kramnik's consideration of this position. So Kramnik says, it is obvious that White has an enduring initiative. It is no longer possible to call the d4 pawn an isolated one, since it is no weaker than e6 pawn. I was happy with the outcome of the opening. Yes, definitely he managed to surprise Topalov and at the same time to come up with the better position out of the opening. Also probably forcing Topalov to spend a lot of time in this stage of the game. So now it is a good moment to make a break and come up with some tips on the opening preparation, because remember, our main goal today is to understand the general problem of improvement in chess. So a few seconds, I will share my tips with you and we will go through them. So the first tip is play solid, which means choose normal openings, but not necessarily main or most popular lines. These lines should go hand in hand with general principles, actually. So that is the main idea. So to choose normal and not dubious from a strategical point of view openings and to play them, just to play solid. The second tip is to think middle games, which means learn typical plans of middle games that arise in your opening lines. If you don't like the spirit of the position, then you have to avoid this opening line at all. When you learn middle games that arise from your opening lines, so when you learn typical positions there, when you learn typical plans, you are much better prepared, so you spend less time during the game, and that means you have more time for making normal decisions, effective decisions in critical moments of the game. And what is your main goal? It is to get comfortable middle game positions that you know pretty well and understand at least not worse than your opponent. In this case, you will have great chances to win the game, or at least not to lose it, right? So the best scenario, of course, is to surprise your opponent, just like Kramnik did in his game. However, it doesn't mean that you have to choose dubious opening lines to do that, because your main goal is to get comfortable, normal middle game position that you know pretty well and understand at least not worse than your opponent. So your goal is not to win the game in the opening. So sometimes it happens, of course, but only when you play to a lower rated player, or at least a player who knows nothing about this opening line. But believe me, if you will choose dubious opening lines on a regular basis, sooner or later you will be not satisfied with your results, because opponents will start preparing to you. It is very hard to surprise your opponents every time, believe me. So it's better to stick to normal openings. The best scenario, of course, is to surprise, but if it doesn't happen, no worries. You just have a normal middle game position, and you've learned already typical plans. So you are ready just to continue the game in the middle game stage and to try to win it. Okay, and that were tips on openings preparation and choosing the correct opening. And I guess now it's time to get back to our game and to see what happened next. So, in this position, Kramnik played a very natural move, bishop c4, improving the position of the bishop, because since pawn is on a5, it's not so easy to prove that bishop makes anything useful, and that diagonal b1 h7. So it's better to improve its position. And now, as you can see, after bishop appeared on c4, white started exerting more pressure on black's main weakness, it is e6 pawn, preventing, for example, moves of the knight at the moment. If knight moves away somewhere, then e6 is hanging and white wins. Black also reacted with the rook to e8, normal move protecting e6 pawn. It's necessary to do prior to continuing development. Kramnik played rook to d1. It is very important not to forget about your weaknesses as well. So d4 is kind of vulnerable pawn, and it's better to protect it somehow. So rook goes to d1 to support the pawn, to prevent some attacks against this pawn. Another idea behind playing rook to d1 is that, for example, if black takes on e5 at some point, then after d takes on e5, d file becomes open and white already occupied it. White is so necessary to think of opening of the d file and this exchange on e5. Actually, it's very easy to understand. Knight on e5 is really great. It is an annoying piece, so it controls so many important squares. When the pawn was on f7, despite being dubious decision, it was still possible to get rid of the knight with the help of f6. So now when the pawn is on f5, the only possibility to get rid of the knight on e5 is to try to exchange it somehow, which means to take it with the bishop or maybe with the knight. Black will do it anyway at some point, because believe me, it's very hard to be patient when you face such a great knight on e5. That's why it makes sense just to prepare for that in advance. Rook is already on d1, so white is ready to take it on e5. And what is interesting, according to Kramnik's annotations to this game, this position was still a part of his preparation. Just amazing how deeply he prepares his opening lines. But he's a top player, so it's predicted. So after rook d1, for example, if black continues with the normal knight to c6 move, which looks natural, to complete a development, to exert some pressure on e5, on d4, and so on, white can continue with the interesting transformation. So knight takes on d5 first, which looks strange because it activates black's rook, and we can see that black already has several attackers of the knight e5, right? So e takes on d5, attacking the bishop. So the bishop goes away, then it's possible to capture on e5 and to win a pawn. But it appears that white has a chance not to go away with the bishop, to leave it hanging, and just to support the knight with the help of f4 move. Appears that black can't take on c4. So if takes, then it leads to a famous pattern of the smothered mate. So queen takes, as you can see, this diagonal is completely weak, and black has no chance to limit the activity of the queen here, to block his king somehow. So after king h8, knight f7, and this sequence of moves, white comes up with this nice checkmate to black's king. So after f4, it's not possible to take the bishop, which means the knight on e5 is protected, and white will have a chance to go away with the bishop at any moment, maybe next move, for example. So let's see, queen d6, and bishop goes to b3. And again, what Kramnik says about this position. There is no way the knight to reach e4, whereas white can do what he wants, and in time he will begin play on the king side. The bishop on b7 is bad, as we can see it is limited with the pawn, and white has a clear positional advantage. It's very hard to disagree, because definitely white has great chances to exploit the power of the knight. e5 here. So for black, it is now very unpleasant to capture on e5 with either the knight or the bishop, because white will recapture with the d4 pawn, in which case white will have a protected passed pawn on the e file, and at the same time a great pressure against d5 pawn. So knight c6 looks dubious in the view of this. Knight e5 takes on f4. In a game, Topalov played knight e7, and starting from here, Kramnik had to make decisions over the board, which is of course the most interesting part of our today's show. So we want to understand how top grandmasters make decisions, and we want to come up with some tips on improvement of this process. So here Kramnik started calculating variations and played bishop to b5, which is a very concrete move, just exerting pressure on d7 and forcing black to clarify the pawn structure, which means forcing black to take on e5 with the bishop, because actually it is the only way to prevent material disaster. So knight on d7 is hanging. Well, probably it's possible to protect it with the bishop to c8, but after that, come on. Black will be completely pinned, and well, the knight on d5 will become vulnerable. It's possible, for example, to come up with the same transformation just to take the knight and come up with the f4. So yeah, this deserves very little attention. So after bishop takes e5, which was the only move, white captures on e5 with the pawn, and now we can see that position changed. So now white doesn't have a weakened pawn on d4. Black's pawn e6 became less vulnerable since e-file is now closed, but it is still vulnerable because it can't be protected. White can protect e5 pawn at any moment with his pawn by playing f4, for example. At the same time, white achieved a pair of bishops, which is also quite good because position is not closed. It is, of course, not that open at the moment, but there is still a potential of opening that position. So white has a long-term pressure due to the pair of bishops. And here it's time for black to think of how to regroup his pieces, because still position looks quite unpleasant. So as you can see, knight is pinned. There is a pressure over d file, and so on. For example, a6 move here, which looks quite natural, just to kick the bishop away from this b5 position, or maybe just to force the bishop to take on d7, which also can solve black's problems at least a little. Knight takes on d5 instead. And black has very unpleasant choice here, since, for example, bishop takes d5 leads to bishop takes a6, grabbing the pawn and being happy with that. E takes on d5 leads to a very bad pawn structure for black. So here e5 pawn becomes a passed pawn. Probably for white it is better just to capture the knight here to prevent rook e5, and then to continue playing this position with a passed pawn which can't be easily protected, for example, and a bad pawn structure for black since d5 is weakened and bishop on b7 is passive, and so on. So from positional point of view, this transformation favors white. So after knight d5 looks like it's better to capture the bishop, but this also leads to some concessions. You can see now this doubled pawns on b5 and b6. After knight goes to b4, which is quite good position for the knight, just blockading both doubled pawns. White has clear plan of attacking them. Just for instance, after queen e7, rook jumps directly to d6. Very good outpost for the rook on the open file, and at the same time, white attacks both e6 and b6. Pawns b5 is hidden, so no questions, white is better here. So after d takes on e5, Topalov played also a natural move. It was queen to e7. And now we can see that black is more or less ready for capture on c3 and hence to create a weakness in white's position. So pawn on c3 will be vulnerable. Pawn on a2 will be also isolated in that case. So for white, it is better to prevent this scenario, and Kramnik just took on d5, bishop took on d5, and now Kramnik came up with another very active move. It is queen to h5, just activating the queen and creating a threat of bishop to g5. It is a very nasty threat since it is a direct attack of the queen. As you can see, queen has to protect d7 knight, so it's not possible to go away somewhere except for f7 square. And in that case, queen just takes queen, and after king takes f7, bishop simply captures the knight on d7. So it is already very hard to find a good way for black to protect his position. But there are some options. For example, h6 move, g6 move, and even knight takes e5, sacrificing an exchange but activating minor pieces. And what is really great is that Kramnik managed to calculate, well, first he managed to predict and then thoroughly calculate the vast majority of the following lines that I will show you just in a few seconds. But attention, at the moment when he played bishop to b5. So actually prior to making this decision of bishop b5, he already saw the position that arises here after queen h5. And moreover, he saw that in depth. So he managed to calculate several lines for 13 moves in depth, starting from bishop b5, of course. So a great depth, but what is more important, he managed to evaluate those positions correctly. That's amazing simply for us, just regular players. And let's see what could have happened in this position. So let's start with the most natural probably. It is the h6 move, because in this case, black directly prevents bishop g5 idea, and actually prevents the activation of a light squared bishop completely, because there is no other interesting points for this bishop. For example, on f4 it will be just protecting e5 pawn, nothing more. So let's see what happens here. Kramnik calculated this amazing line. So bishop takes on h6. Well, not terribly surprising, but you will see what happens in the very end of the variation. So with the help of this bishop h6, Kramnik manages to open up a position of the king. Now after queen g6, the point is that queen can't go to g7. In this case, queen just takes queen and then bishop takes d7, regaining the minor piece and having an extra pawn for nothing, for no compensation. So king goes to f8 instead. Queen takes one more pawn. So after this check, black again has a choice between only king moves, king f7 and king g8. King g8 leads to disaster after this typical rook lift. Rook goes to d3 to attack the king from g3, and for example, if black somehow prevents it, it's possible also to occupy h3 square with the threat of, let's say, queen h8 followed by rook h7. So this is already lost. Black has no satisfactory defense. The only possibility is to exchange queens once again, but this again leads to a simply winning endgame when white takes on d7. So after queen h6, king f7 is the only move. And now rook takes on d5. Very nice exchange sacrifice, just destroying black's defense, because now black has completely weakened light squared complex. So after that, queen goes to h7 with check. Of course, king e6 is very bad in the view of, for example, just queen g6 check, and then if king takes here, then rook to e1, one of possible variations, so the very simple win for white here. So after queen h7, king should go to f8, after which queen takes one more pawn on f5, attacking the knight at the same time. So now it's time for black to simplify a position, otherwise white will have enormously strong attack. Bishop takes on d7, queen takes f5, bishop takes f5, rook takes e5, bishop goes to d3, rook goes to e8, creating a threat of rook to e1, and now king to f1. And only here Kramnik stopped calculating variation. Just amazing. So he saw this position in his mind in details. And again, let's try to understand what he thought and how he evaluated this position. So again, Kramnik says, I think it is technically won for white. The pawns advance, and I do not see how black can create a counterplay, apart from by trying to exchange rooks on the c file. So it's possible, for example, to regroup the rooks somehow to the c file and try to exchange them. But even this does not guarantee an easy life. So in fact, this position is not so simple, like Kramnik thought, but probably only a great computer program can hold this position somehow, because it is a well-known pattern where minor piece is not worse than the rook, at least. In fact, in such a situation, I think that the bishop is better than the rook, because for rooks, it is necessary to have open files, to have concrete targets to attack. Here, as you can see, one open file, E file, is perfectly protected by white pieces, so it's not possible to break through. On the C file, the only possibility is just to exchange the rook, white's rook, and white has no weaknesses at all, so it's not possible to attack with the rooks here. And white has a clear plan, so white has 3 connected passed pawns. So white's task is pretty clear, just to start pushing those pawns and to queen them. So it is a so-called pattern, right? So something that is pretty known, pretty well known. So a general situation on the board which has a concrete evaluation. So actually, for understanding the evaluation of the whole line that calculated by Kramnik, it was necessary to correctly estimate this final position. And to do that, it is not necessary to calculate even further, even deeper. You have just to recognize this pattern when the bishop is not worse than the rook. So to understand that white has more than just enough compensation for a missing exchange, and then stop. So pattern recognition, remember this basic idea, because pattern recognition helps you to estimate positions correctly, to evaluate positions correctly, and pattern recognition helps you to direct your thinking. So usually you have a lot of different moves to calculate at first glance, but well, proper positional understanding, proper recognition of the patterns, strategic patterns mainly, gives you a chance to reduce the quantity of variations that you should actually calculate. And also it helps to, which is more importantly, to evaluate the final position of each line that you calculate. But anyway, just look, it is the move number 28, bishop b5 was the move number 15. So Kramnik just predicted this. That was great. Okay, that was about h6 possibility. So here white takes on h6, and the next we already saw. What else? For example, knight takes e5. Another possibility that Kramnik predicted. So here Kramnik was just very careful about opponent's resources. At first glance, this move doesn't deserve any attention because it loses the exchange at first glance again for nothing, but in fact black has good minor pieces after that. So after bishop takes e8, rook takes e8, so it's not so easy to break through with this position. But Kramnik also predicted the line with more active approach. So bishop goes to g5. So the first move that he calculated was, of course, queen b7, an interesting resource, just starting a counterattack, which looks dangerous. However, here white simply captures on e8, and after bishop takes g2, he has this great rook d7 move, breaking the connection between the queen and square f7, and also deflecting the knight if it takes on d7. So if knight takes on d7, it's really easy. Queen goes to f7 check, and after king goes to h8, white continues with some sort of decisive attack. So for example, it's possible to play here bishop takes d7 with the idea of, for instance, bishop h6 and something like that. But now I can see that it's not so clear, right? So let's see that in details. So knight takes on d7. Maybe white has something better. Not sure, but let's see. So queen goes to f7. King here. We don't have queen to f8 at the moment because knight controls that square. Maybe just rook to d1. Interesting. I didn't see this variation actually. So I was pretty sure that f8 square is possible to occupy. Well, I still have to train my calculation and visualization of positions. Okay, let's skip it at the moment. So probably white has something here. So for example, bishop d7 looks very dangerous. Maybe bishop to f6 immediately. No, bishop f6, knight takes. Bishop h6 takes with the pawn, and f6 is still controlled as well. Not so easy. Okay. So quite strange. Rook to d7. Maybe here Kramnik has something better. Bishop, no. Rook should go here. So knight takes. Bishop f7 gives nothing. Queen f7. Bishop takes. Well, probably it's enough just to take the knight. At least white has an extra minor piece here, by the way. So the only possible problem is bishop to h3 or h1. And that is quite a problem, actually. Okay, so it will be nice if you will find the solution here. But Kramnik, according to Kramnik, it was winning. Well, we have to be careful. even with top grandmasters annotations. So another line here is that if black continues with the knight f3 check, then after king takes g2, discovered check doesn't harm. So if knight h4, it is actually a double check, so from the knight and from the queen at the same time. So king goes to f1, and eventually, after several checks, black has no a normal check to continue, and white wins with the enormous amount of extra material here. So Kramnik understood that after bishop g5, queen f8 was necessary, more or less, and after that bishop takes, and rook goes to c1, a better version of capturing the rook on e8, because now bishop is on g5, much more active. Queen is no longer on the 7th rank, but on the back rank, and white has a perspective of occupying 7th rank next move, just creating enormous pressure. So white should be better here. That is what Kramnik calculated and predicted by playing 15th move bishop to b5. So deep calculation and pattern recognition. So after queen h5, Topalov played g6, which is a solid move, preventing bishop g5 immediately, securing square f7 for a queen in case of attack from the bishop on g5. However, this, as you can see, a concession, right? So now black has so weak dark squared complex on the king side, and all those squares are around the king, which makes position of the king quite vulnerable and potentially very dangerous. So queen goes to h6, natural choice, just to be closer to the king. It is still not possible to simplify a position with black by playing, for example, queen g7 because of the exchange in bishop takes d7. We already saw that many times. So rook goes to c8. Very clever choice. Rook goes away from that pin on diagonal a4, e8. Rook occupies very important open c file here, creating some sort of threats connected with probably rook c2 at some point. And, well, it's time for white to demonstrate what he has. So Kramnik played bishop to g5 here, attacking the queen. That was quite natural. And after queen f7, he played very interesting, but a bit surprising move, bishop takes d7. Well, actually, it is a very natural decision, but it looks a bit surprising since we just discussed that white achieved a pair of bishops. It is a good long-term advantage, and position is not that closed, and so on, so on, so on. So everything says that probably it's better to keep a pair of bishops. And of course, Kramnik was a bit hesitating about making this move, bishop to d7, since he wanted probably to keep a pair of bishops. However, he calculated the line like bishop to f4, a6, bishop to f1, then b5, creating a threat at some point to play bishop c4 even, so b3 is more or less forced. And here he understood that, okay, he has probably a long-term advantage, but it is still not so clear how to break through here. So position is still not that simple to play. And after bishop d7, what he did? He actually recognized, and it was very simple for a player like him, recognized another pattern, which is a middle game when you have major pieces on the board, and at the same time you have this pair of bishops of opposing colors. So as you can see, after queen takes on d7, black has a light squared bishop and white has a dark squared bishop. So almost every club player knows that, come on, bishops of opposing colors is a great trend for a draw, right? But it's true only for endgames. Even in endgames with bishops of opposing colors and, for example, rooks still on the board, the side that has initiative and has concrete objects to attack still has a lot of chances. Moreover here, so when we have all major pieces on the board, So it is a typical pattern that says if you have a concrete plan of attack, or if you start an attack, a direct attack against opponent's king, having those bishops of opposing colors, you benefit and you have great chances to win. So what Kramnik says about this decision. Here there was a choice again. I thought that the bishop on f6 and the potential attack were very dangerous, but I also could have kept a pair of bishops. However, it seemed to me that the exchange on d7 was more promising. So Kramnik recognized the pattern and after some calculations had a feeling that, okay, this setup will be better for him. At least it is to his taste. Also not bad. Bishop goes to f6. Now, so white increases pressure. Now g7 and h8 are under control. Queen goes to f7, and Kramnik continues with the silent move on the other side of the board. So he plays b3. It is a prophylaxis, also a feature of top players. So never forget about opponent's resources. So this move prevents rook from going to c4 and using the force rank potentially. So let's see how it is possible to do. So let's imagine that white starts his direct attack on the king side, coming up with this typical rook lift, getting the rook to the king side. Rook simply goes to c2 here first. One rook goes to c2. Rook g3, another rook goes to c8. And now white's natural plan is to play h4, h5. So h4, rook 8 goes to c4, and now as you can see, force rank becomes very critical here, since after h5, creating a threat of taking on g6 with a checkmate on h8, black has this defending resource. Rook goes to g4, covering the g-file. And now, for example, if rook takes, pawn takes, and for example queen goes to g5, attacking this g4 pawn, black has another fantastic defending resource. It is h6. Since taking on h6 or g6 will be not enough. So for example, if queen takes on h6, then queen goes to g6. So black is ready even to sacrifice a pawn on g6, but to get rid of the queens on the board. And since black controls c-file and d-file is closed, it will be extremely hard for white to break through. So here, these drawish trends become true. The same is after queen takes g6. So in this case, black just exchanges queens, and this position is even better than after queen takes h6 because black secures this h6 pawn on the board. It is additional resource to counterplay, to have a counterplay after h5, let's say h4, h3, and so on. So this looks quite surprising, but as you can see, black has a chance to protect here. So after queen g4, black can play g5, and well, this position is very hard to win with white, since black's pieces one of a sudden become very, very active. So bishop is already active, rook became active on the second rank, and queen, which was very, very passive during almost all the game, now becomes extremely dangerous after getting to h7 and controlling this diagonal. Thinking of probably reaching other pieces in the counterattack. So that was a resource by black to exploit the force rank. That's why b3 looks so good. Prophylaxis, just preventing this rook c4. And anyway, this move is quite useful because it limits not only the rook but also the bishop d5. So here, Topalov decided to try to simplify a position because white is ready to continue with this direct attack. So rook d3, rook g3, h4, h5. Now it is a real threat since black has no this rook c4, rook g4 maneuver. So queen f8, offering the exchange of queens. And another great calculation and predicting opponent's resources made by Kramnik. So he played queen to f4. However, queen g5 looks much more logical, having the queen closer to the king and still having this threat of h4, h5, and so on. So here black just in time with his counterplay. Rook c2, h4, rook goes to c8, h5, and now, pay attention, queen goes to b4. So again, the same motive. So black wants to use the force rank for defense, the same g4 square for defense, but now with the queen. So that was a threat actually after queen f8, the idea behind queen f8, and that's why Kramnik eventually chose queen to f4, which actually prevents queen b4. So let's see what happens here. Takes on g6, queen goes to g4. Now it's no longer so dangerous because queen just controls everything important here. Square on g7, so there is no checkmate. After queen g4 takes on h7 and king to h7, again, all black's pieces become extremely active. So it's not so easy for white to prove that extra pawn means anything here. For example, rook d4, black even sacrifices one more pawn, g3. The only normal possibility for white to take it is to take it with the rook, but this allows black's king to the center. So king g6, rook here, king goes to f5, rook takes on g3, and now after rook c1, simplifying position even more, rook takes, king goes to h2, the rook comes back to the second rank, attacking f2, a2, and appears it is a equal position, despite white has two extra pawns at the moment, but bishops of opposing colors and great activity of black's pieces help him to make a draw here. So that's why queen f4. As you can see, very deep thinking and very deep calculation every time, demonstrated by Kramnik here. So after queen f4, as we can see, white has no this sort of direct attack, and this actually stops white's attack for a while. But on the other hand, Kramnik manages to prevent most promising counterplay by black. So that is a great decision. And here, Topalov continued with the active move rook c2. That appeared a great mistake, actually, because after rook c2, he's not in time to protect his king, and at the same time, he's not able to perform a sufficient counterplay. So rook c2 was a mistake, but it's very hard to believe that such a move, which is so natural and active, can be a mistake. So actually, the best way for him to play was h6. Another concession, but at the same time, this prepares a very important regrouping of the pieces. So king can go to h7 now, after which queen won't be pinned to protecting dark squares on the king side. So this can help black to make the queen more active. So for example, after h4, again, black just ignores the second rank, but plays rook to c5, protecting the bishop. Because as you can see, white has a plan of completely exposing black's position. For example, it happens after rook c2 move. So here white has a great sacrifice. Rook takes d5, ed5, now rook to d1, and after queen c5, natural defense of the d file, white continues with the h file. And white's attack is extremely dangerous here. It is also possible, for example, to change the move order, I guess, to start here with the h5 and then rook to d1. So all this looks really dangerous. But white still has to be careful. For example, if white takes on h6 here, then of course queen f2. But, well, it's nonsense for a player like Kramnik, so h5, of course, the best choice. So instead of allowing that, black should play the rook to c5. And here appears that white's direct attack on the king side doesn't work very well. For instance, rook to d3, rook to c8, another rook to d1, king to h7, king to h2, probably preparing something, queen goes to f7, and it's not so easy to find a spot. It's not so easy to find a target here because, well, if h5 then g5 and position is closed. It's not easy to attack g6 here because black has enough resources to protect it. So This position is probably even not better for white. So instead, Kramnik, during the postmortem analysis, understood that the best way to play is rook to c1. Counterintuitive decision, just to simplify a position a bit, but to get rid of black's potentially active rooks. So rook c8, for example, takes. Another rook goes to c1. King to h7 to protect h6 and to free the queen finally. And then after this exchanges, queen goes to d2. Despite at first glance position looks deadly drawish, white still has a chance to try to play for a win because black's king is still vulnerable. Black's bishop d5 is pinned to d5 square because if it goes away somewhere, queen can invade through d7 or d8 with checkmating threats and probably decisive attack. Still not so easy for white to find a winning plan. Maybe it makes sense to try to do something with pawns on the queen side to try to find a spot there. But as you can see, black's position is very solid here, and well, it was the best chance. Which actually means even if you play your best chess, right? If you're, well, let's say if you're a Kramnik, right? A player like Kramnik, one of the best players ever, and you play your best, you manage to surprise your opponent in the opening, so you have a psychological advantage. Then you choose great moves, so you improve your position, and so on. So when you make your best to win the game, sometimes it's not possible to get the desired result. So if your opponent also plays good, well, probably it will be a draw. So you have to be ready for it. But it's obvious, of course. So like Kramnik says, chess is actually a drawn game. So never mind. In the game, Topalov came with the very active but surprisingly wrong rook c2, and after which Kramnik started his great attack. So h4, rook to c8, h5, and well, black has no normal counterplay here. So the problem is that it's no longer possible to play h6, g5 to close the position, so position will be opened in the nearest future. So queen goes to e8 to control g6 square probably, and now rook simply goes to d3, literally forcing black's next reply because white's threat is very simple, just to take on g6, and after h7 takes g6, rook goes to h3, the checkmate in several moves. So rook goes to c3 to control the third rank. Now another rook goes to d1, and it is already very hard for black to find a good move because white is about to sacrifice on d5, which will be another interesting pattern that we'll discuss a bit later. There is no active counterplay anymore, so g6 is under pressure, and queen h6 is in the air, followed by several moves like rook d5 and maybe at some point e6 or something like that. So white is ready to attack. Black has no enough defensive resources here. So in a game, he took on h5 with the idea to have g6 square for the queen to try to counterattack maybe, but this counterattack never happened because now Kramnik takes on d5. That is another pattern that he recognized. It was actually very simple for him, but anyway, exchange sacrifice that leads to completely damaged pawn structure and completely exposed king. So here black has no chances to survive actually, but Kramnik says, as strong as it is natural, I had no great doubts about this move, but I exerted myself and checked the variations thoroughly. So even in such a position, a player of Kramnik's level still calculates all important variations accurately and deeply. That's the point. So you have to calculate every time if you want to play good chess. So chess is generally is all about proper calculation. So it only seems like, well, positional understanding prevails, and so on, so on, so on. Yeah, no questions. It's very important to understand chess, to have a good understanding of the strategy, and so on, so on, so on. But anyway, on the high level, calculation what decides the game usually. So a proper calculation. Okay, let's see what happened next. After this capture on d5, Kramnik just played e6. Very good move. Now pawn is dangerous itself, but what is more important is that it pawns controls f7, making king extremely vulnerable here. And this also, as you can see, opens diagonal. So now that bishop works both ways, controlling squares around the king and also attacking the rook. So the easiest outcome could be, for example, queen g6. Not actually queen g6. Let's start with the queen e6. Yeah, that's easier to understand. So after queen e6, white just continues with the queen g5 check, king f7, queen goes to g7, and after king goes away, bishop simply takes on c3. So as you can see, bishop is protected by the queen. So white wins material and actually wins the game. Another possibility after e6 is to try queen to g6 move, preventing queen g5. But in this case, white simply captures the rook. After rook takes, queen jumps to b8 with check, exploiting the weakened back rank. And after king g7, just e7, and promotes. So black has no chances to stop the pawn. And finally, if rook from c3 goes to c6, preparing rook takes e6, now with the idea of defense over 6th rank, so to connect the rook through the 6th rank. White has this rook d3 chance. Rook takes c6, rook goes to g3, check. And after king f7, white has very, very nice move that was also predicted by Kramnik while calculating variations. So queen goes to h6. Simply continuing the attack, and the best option for black is to capture the bishop, but then after queen g7 check, king e6 and rook e3, king is forced to d6, and white captures first the rook on f6 with check, then captures the queen and captures everything that is possible to capture. So white simply wins here. Which means after e6, the only normal resource for black is just rook from c3 to c7, at least trying to cover the 7th rank. And now rook takes on d5, capturing the pawn. So actually white starts collecting pawns, at the same time getting closer to black's king. So very natural strategy, very natural way to play. It is a nice position in a sense of possible tactical outcomes. For example, if queen goes to g6 here, as I said before, e6 is a great pawn just controlling f7. So as you can see, black's king is completely limited. So if queen goes to g6, queen takes c7 here. So as you can see, if rook takes, well, rook jumps to d8 with the checkmate. And the same happens if, for example, black makes this check on c1, king goes to h2, and after queen to g6, queen again takes the rook, but now on c1 with the same outcome. So rook goes to d8. So looks nice, at least. After rook takes d5, Topalov took on e6, which looks like the most normal move, just to get rid of this extremely nasty pawn on e6 and to attack the bishop. But still, it is not enough to save the game. So queen g5, natural continuation, and the problem with that, once the king goes to the f-file, rook just takes on f5, continuing this great attack, and black has no chance to survive. So let's see. In the game, Topalov played king to f8. It was also possible to play king f7. In this case, rook takes f5. And now there is a chance to play rook c5, just bothering the rook, so preventing probably the discovery check of the bishop. Instead, white can just take on h5, grabbing one more pawn, king goes to f8, and now bishop to e5 anyway. So check, king goes to e7, now queen takes h7. At the moment, white already has more than enough material compensation for the exchange, but of course it doesn't matter. After king e8, rook goes to g5. What matters here is that white has great threats to black's king. So rook g5 creating a direct threat of rook g8. The only chance is to take on e5, and then queen checks from h5, attacking the king and the rook at the same time. So finally, white will have a simply winning position with 2 extra pawns and continuing attack against the king. So more than enough to win. After queen g5, Topalov played king to f8. And here Kramnik also took on f7, very natural continuation of the attack. So now, in addition to those threats, like in the previous line, white has a chance to check the king with the bishop from e7 and g7. So there is also additional threat of the double check. In the game, Topalov decided to play rook to f7, covering the f file. It was also possible to try the same rook c5, but here white's win is even easier than in the previous line. So bishop goes to e7 check, it is a double check. King goes to e8, and well, 2 options. The first is to play bishop to c5, rook takes c5, queen takes h5 first with check, then taking the rook, and this should be an easy win. For example, queen h7, queen a7 is possible, but then it might be dangerous in the view of potential perpetual, so probably it's better just to take on c5, also having 2 extra pawns, and not a big problem to convert the advantage, so this is protected. If queen goes to e1, for instance, king goes to h2, black has no further checks with queen, so this means white can continue with collecting pawns or starting promoting his pawns to queen. So that was one possibility. After king e8, it was also possible to play rook f8 first, and after king d7 to take on c5 here. So that is also a winning position, despite, surprisingly, we have a material balance if black takes on c5, but the power of pieces is way too different. Moreover, after rook takes c5, it's possible to continue with, for example, queen d8, and after king c6, rook f6, just winning the game immediately. So 2 options, position is lost for black. So to rook f5, he played to f7 with the rook. Queen goes to h6, continuing the attack and forcing the king to the e file. King goes to the e file, and now rook goes to the e file again, just continuing the attack and now winning the queen. Rook c6, the last chance. The point here is that if white takes on e6, then after rook e6, as you can see, bishop is pinned, and one of a sudden position is not that clear. So maybe even black will have some winning chances, who knows. 2 rooks are very good against the queen usually, when they work together and when there are some concrete targets to attack. But after rook c6, Kramnik came up with a very nice solution of this problem. He simply took on h5 with the queen, and appears that everything is pinned all around. So first of all, he went away from this 6th rank, so bishop f6 is no longer in danger, so white is ready to take on e6. And at the same time, this bishop is invulnerable since rook f7 is pinned, and queen on e6 is also pinned. So here Topalov resigned. What a nice game, right? So Kramnik did everything to win, and he deserved this win because, first of all, he had a much better opening preparation, so he managed to surprise his opponent. He managed to make Topalov be nervous and choosing not very well order of moves in the opening, which allowed Kramnik to achieve a good middle game position that he was aware of and performed quite in a quite interesting way. Then he came up with some sort of great calculation work, just calculating deeply and evaluating all the final positions just correctly, which is very important. And also he did everything to exert pressure. So he predicted opponents' defensive resources. He just tried to choose probably the most promising continuations and so on. So he deserved this win. But anyways, you can see sometimes it's possible, even in such a situation, it's possible not to win the game and to make a draw. So instead of rook c2, the best move was h6. But I can imagine that to this moment of game, Topalov already had a time trouble and was exhausted, probably solving really unpleasant problems during all the game, starting from the very opening. That's why there is no surprise that he made a mistake. But again, it was very hard to believe that rook c2 could be a mistake. So proper calculation decides. Sometimes the moves that look great, in fact, appear not that great, at least, and only a proper calculation can prove it, because the mistake was discovered here when, after rook a1, black had no normal defense against rook d5 idea, exposing the king completely and continuing with the attack. So, as we can see, Kramnik's success in this game was mainly based on the following. So the first, deep and accurate calculation. And second, correct evaluation of the position based on the pattern recognition. So now let us just summarize everything and come up with some further tips on improvement. So we will start with tips on correct evaluation of position. So first of all, you have to learn chess. That sounds really obvious, but believe me, you have to learn chess just badly, okay? So learn chess in general. So it doesn't matter whether it relates to your opening repertoire or not. The more you learn, the more patterns you memorize. So the more chances you have to recognize them during the game. It means that you have to follow, for example, analysis of grandmasters. So one of the best ways to improve is to follow thorough analysis of the game played by a top player. For example, Kramnik played the game against Topalov and he thoroughly analyzed it and commented for New in Chess magazine. That was, by the way, my main source for this show. So follow those analyses. You will see how top players think. You will understand how they make decisions, how they calculate, how they evaluate positions, and so on. One of possible ways to improve. But the main idea is to learn chess in general. The more you know, the better. The more patterns you memorize. Second tip for today is play and analyze. Actually, your games is one of the greatest source for improvement. So after every played game, just identify where you made a wrong evaluation, for example, and don't be lazy to find out why. Believe me, on the club players level, there is a great room for improvement on this direction. So you don't have to be lazy with analyzing your games. Just analyze them and try to identify moments when you made a wrong evaluation, when you made a mistake, and try to understand why you made it. Only when you understand why you made a wrong evaluation, why you made a mistake, you can fix it and come up with some progress. So what's your main goal on this way? With improvement of the correct evaluation. So your main goal is to build up a general understanding of chess and to memorize as many patterns as you can and recognize them when playing a game. So rather obvious, however, well, today we come up only with tips. Tricks will come next shows. Okay, and finally, to the most interesting part, and maybe one of the most complicated parts. So calculation and decision making. The first tip, build up an algorithm. So it sounds a bit complicated probably, but a proper calculation takes time. So when you play a real game, you're usually under time pressure. So you don't have infinite time to make a decision. So every decision is limited by time. You have to be quite fast since, for example, modern time controls become faster and faster day after day. So a proper calculation takes time since that you need an algorithm that makes your decision making efficient, which also means fast. So you have to calculate dip, you have to calculate accurately, and at the same time you have to be fast. Otherwise you will end up in a time trouble. And believe me, I'm a great expert in getting to a time trouble. Well, I used to be. I used to be. But anyway, it is a big problem usually because you can play a great game, but then in a time trouble you just waste everything. You just spoil everything, and you can even lose a simply winning position. So you have to be a good calculator of variations, which means you have to be not only deep and accurate, but also you have to be fast. The next tip is train. Also a very obvious tip. So there is no magic solution that could make you a great calculating machine like Houdini or, for example, Komodo or even like Ripka. So there is no magic solution. You have to train your calculation skills and develop your algorithm. So actually, there is a basic algorithm that is pretty well known probably. And by the way, I will present this basic algorithm next show in 1 week. However, your final goal is to come up with your own algorithm. So exactly the algorithm that suits you the best. So you have to analyze it. So there is a great portion of self-analysis usually. Also after played games, for example, when you made a mistake in the calculation, you have to understand where you made a mistake and why you made that mistake. So what was wrong with your calculation algorithm to come up with some improvement on that way. And finally, what is your main goal on this way is to come up with the skills of accurate, deep, yet fast calculation. That is also clear. And well, if you will do that, you will see that your play and your results become better and better and better. That is actually everything that I presented for today's show. Thank you very much for being with me this evening. Next show, Training Tuesday, you may see in 1 week. So next Tuesday, from now on, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. by European time zone. So next time, as I said before, I will present the basic algorithm of making decisions, the basic algorithm of calculations that you can apply in many cases, by the way, in this row shape, but also you can improve it, develop it, and just to make some tweaks with it. So it's flexible usually. Also, maybe next week, maybe this week, I will come up with another Banter Blitz show. So yesterday it was a disaster when I had a problem with the light. So my webcam video became very close to terrible. However, I managed to play several interesting games, and I think it was the main task actually, to play several interesting games with some instructive annotations and maybe making some fun and so on. So I enjoyed the process, and I'm going to do this time after time to keep playing with you guys. So just follow Chess20 for Twitter for updates, and you won't miss that. But if you will follow me on Twitter and friend me on Facebook and follow me, for example, on YouTube. So I have my personal YouTube channel, and you will definitely not miss anything connected with me. So the show or Banter Blitz or anything else, maybe some additional materials. So you're welcome. Just friend me, follow me, visit my website. You can see all the proper links there on my website, and the link to my website you can find in my profile on Chess24. So hope this show was better than the previous one, and it was instructive and interesting. So see you next shows, and take care. Bye.